In 2018, a photograph went viral that made millions of fans around the world fear the worst. The image showed a man visiting a temple in Tibet, his frame thin, his hair sparse and white, his posture slightly stooped. He looked like he could have been 70 years old, but the man in that photograph was only 55, and his name was Jet Li. This was the same Jet Li who once moved so fast that directors had to ask him to slow down because cameras couldn't capture his movements. The same Jet Li who sold 500 million movie tickets with a single film. The same Jet Li who Hollywood believed would become the next global action superstar. But here's what most people don't realize. Jet Li didn't fade away because his body failed him. He walked away. And that decision cost him tens of millions of dollars. What he protected by leaving was worth far more. The real story involves a near-death experience that shattered everything he believed about success. A contract demand from one of the biggest franchises in cinema history that he refused to sign. And a philosophy about power and restraint that Hollywood could never understand. By the end of this, you'll see why the man who could have had everything chose to let it all go. To understand why Jet Li eventually left Hollywood behind, you have to understand where he came from. And his origins couldn't have been further from the glamour of red carpets and movie premieres. Li Lianjie was born on April 26, 1963, in Beijing, China, the youngest of 5 children. When he was just 2 years old, his father passed away and the family was plunged into poverty. His mother struggled to feed and clothe her children. There was no money for good schools, no connections to open doors, no safety net. Young Lianjie grew up understanding that nothing in life would come easily. Then, at 8 years old, something happened that would change the course of his life. He was randomly assigned to a wushu class during a summer sports program. The moment he stepped onto the training floor, his coaches recognized something extraordinary. His primary coach, Wu Bin, saw a talent that came along perhaps once in a generation. The boy was naturally gifted, but more than that, he possessed an almost supernatural work ethic. Wu Bin was so invested in the young prodigy that he actually bought food for Li's impoverished family, knowing the boy needed proper nutrition to reach his potential. That investment would pay off beyond anything anyone could have imagined. By 11 years old, Li wasn't just competing against other children, he was facing off against adults twice his age in national championships, and he was winning. When he stood on the podium after claiming his first national title, he was so much shorter than the silver and bronze medalists that it must have looked almost comical, but there was nothing funny about what he was feeling. As the national anthem played, tears streamed down his face. In his mind, he was thinking of only one person. This medal is for you, Mom. You didn't raise me in vain. He would win the national all-around championship 5 consecutive times. No other man in Chinese history has matched that record. But it wasn't just domestic audiences taking notice. In 1974, at just 11 years old, Li would find himself standing on the White House lawn, performing for the President of the United States. What happened next would reveal something fundamental about his character, something that would echo through every major decision of his life. The year 1974 was a tumultuous time in America. President Richard Nixon was drowning in the Watergate scandal, his administration crumbling. It was during this chaos that a delegation from China arrived as part of the cultural exchange program known as ping pong diplomacy. Among the delegation was the Chinese national wushu team, including their youngest member, the 11-year-old prodigy who had already earned the nickname Jet for his blazing speed. Their final performance took place on the South Lawn of the White House, with President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger watching from just feet away. Young Li performed his routine with the precision and power that had made him a champion. When he finished, Nixon approached him. The president, perhaps looking for any positive moment amid the scandal consuming his presidency, was clearly impressed. "Young man, your kung fu is very impressive," Nixon said. "How about being my bodyguard when you grow up?" Most children would have been speechless. Most adults would have jumped at the opportunity. What came out of this 11-year-old's mouth stunned everyone in the room. "No, I don't want to protect any individual. When I grow up, I want to defend my 1 billion Chinese countrymen." There was a moment of awkward silence, then Henry Kissinger, the veteran diplomat who had navigated some of the most delicate negotiations in modern history, broke the tension. "Heavens," Kissinger said. "Such a young boy, and he already speaks like a diplomat." In that moment, something about Jet Li's character was revealed. This was not someone who would be seduced by power. This was not someone who would abandon his principles for personal gain. Even as a child, he understood there were things more important than serving the most powerful individual on Earth. That same instinct would cost him dearly decades later, but it would also save something priceless. By 19, Jet Li's competitive career came to an abrupt end. A knee injury forced him to retire from wushu, cutting short what could have been many more years of championship dominance. What seemed like a devastating setback would open a door to something bigger. In 1982, Hong Kong filmmakers came calling. They wanted to make a martial arts film shot at the actual Shaolin Temple in China, and they needed someone who could bring authentic wushu to the screen. Li was cast in the lead role. The production conditions were brutal. He was paid just 1 yuan per day, about 14 cents. The young actor was essentially working for nothing, filming grueling action sequences in harsh conditions. At times, he considered quitting. The pay was insulting, the work exhausting, and there was no guarantee any of it would lead anywhere, but he persevered. And when the Shaolin Temple was released, something unprecedented happened. The film sold an estimated 500 million tickets in China alone. To put that in perspective, that's equivalent to every person in the United States watching the same movie 1.5 times. Overnight, the teenage wushu champion became a national sensation. The impact extended beyond box office numbers. Before the film, the actual Shaolin Temple had been left in ruins, burned down during Civil War, and damaged during the Cultural Revolution. After the film's release, tourists flooded to the site. Aspiring martial artists made pilgrimages to train there. The movie didn't just launch Jet Li's career, it literally saved one of China's most sacred cultural landmarks from obscurity. Decades later, when he commanded $13 million for a single film, he would look back on those 14-cent days and understand that the struggle had been necessary. But his biggest struggles were still ahead, and they wouldn't come from poverty or physical hardship, they would come from Hollywood itself. By the late 1980s, Jet Li's initial burst of fame in mainland China had begun to cool. A move to Hong Kong would reignite his career in ways that exceeded even the Shaolin Temple. In 1991, director Tsui Hark cast Li in Once Upon a Time in China. The role was Wang Fei Hung, a legendary folk hero who held the Guinness World Record for most appearances of any character in media history, with over 100 films to his name. Taking on such an iconic role was a massive risk. Legends like Quan Tak Hing and Jackie Chan had already left their marks on the character, and Li faced an additional challenge that seemed insurmountable. He didn't speak Cantonese, the language of Hong Kong cinema. But what Li brought to the role transcended language. His portrayal relied on pure physical expression, dignified presence, and martial arts that left audiences breathless. The film was a massive hit, spawning multiple sequels and establishing Li as the undisputed king of Hong Kong action cinema. In 1994, he starred in Fist of Legend, a remake of Bruce Lee's Fist of Fury. The film earned a rare perfect score on Rotten Tomatoes. Even Bruce Lee's widow praised Li's performance, saying he had captured the spirit of her late husband. By the mid-1990s, Jet Li had achieved everything an Asian action star could hope to achieve in Asian cinema. He was wealthy, respected, and had created a body of work that would influence martial arts films for generations. Then Hollywood came calling, and Jet Li was about to discover that conquering America would require navigating a very different battlefield. In 1998, Jet Li made his American film debut in Lethal Weapon 4. It was a calculated risk. Li barely spoke English, he had never played a villain, and he was entering a franchise with established stars in Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. None of that mattered once the cameras started rolling. Director Richard Donner faced an unusual problem during production. He had to repeatedly ask Li to slow down because the actor was literally moving faster than the camera's shutter speed could capture. The technology couldn't keep up with what Li's body could do. The film grossed nearly $300 million worldwide. Producer Joel Silver, impressed by what he had seen, promised Li leading roles. That promise led to Romeo Must Die in 2000. Pairing Li with R&B singer Aaliyah. On the surface, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The films were making money. His name was becoming known to American audiences, but behind the scenes, frustration was building. Hollywood, Li discovered, had very specific ideas about what an Asian actor could do on screen. It's frustrating because Hollywood only expects a certain thing from me, he later said. There are a lot of movies I want to make, and the studios aren't interested. The formula was always the same. Romeo Must Die makes $60 million, so put Jet Li with another black actor, have him play a robot or a secret agent, spend less than $30 million, repeat. There was no interest in expanding what he could do, only in replicating what had already worked. Even more telling was what happened in the romantic subplots. Despite being paired with attractive co-stars like Aaliyah and Bridget Fonda, Li's characters never actually shared romantic moments on screen. There was chemistry suggested, but audiences never saw the kiss. Hollywood couldn't quite imagine an Asian man as a romantic lead. For Li, who had spent years making films that explored philosophy and the deeper meanings of martial arts, the American approach felt hollow. The message was only how to kick butt, to learn some special move to eliminate the bad guy, but something was missing. Then came an offer that would force him to make the hardest decision of his career. Around 2001, Jet Li received what many would consider the opportunity of a lifetime. The Wachowskis, fresh off the massive success of The Matrix, wanted him for their upcoming sequels. The role was Seraph, the Guardian of the Oracle. The original Matrix had revolutionized action cinema by bringing Hong Kong martial arts to Western audiences. The legendary choreographer Yuen Wu-ping, who had worked with Lee on Fist of Legend, had designed the sequences. It seemed like a perfect fit, but when Lee reviewed the contract, something troubled him deeply. The deal required 3 months of filming, but he would need to be with the production crew for 9 months total. The extra 6 months would be spent capturing his martial arts movements in a digital library. Every kick, every punch, every stance would be recorded and stored. And when the recording was complete, the rights to all those movements would belong to the studio forever. Lee thought about what that would mean. He had spent his entire life developing his abilities. From age 8, he had trained relentlessly, sacrificing his childhood, pushing his body beyond normal limits. His movements were the product of decades of dedication, thousands of hours of practice, an entire philosophy of self-improvement. And Hollywood wanted to put all of that in a digital file they could use however they pleased, with whoever they wanted, for eternity. I was thinking, I've been training my entire life, Lee later explained, and we martial artists could only grow older, yet they could own my moves as intellectual property forever. So I said I couldn't do that. At the time, some thought he was being paranoid. The technology to truly replicate a human performer digitally seemed far off. 2 decades later, with AI creating deepfakes and studios using digital likenesses of deceased actors, his concerns look prophetic. He had seen something coming that most people couldn't imagine. The decision may have cost him his place in one of cinema's most iconic franchises. Some believe his refusal quietly resulted in him being passed over for bigger projects afterward. The glass ceiling he seemed on the verge of breaking remained firmly in place. But Jet Li had made his choice. His life's work was not for sale. What he couldn't have known was that an event far more devastating than any Hollywood disappointment was about to change everything. On Christmas Day 2004, Jet Li arrived at the Four Seasons Resort in the Maldives with his wife and 2 youngest daughters, ages 4 and 1. It was supposed to be a peaceful family vacation. The next morning at 7:50 a.m., Lee felt the ground shake. He recognized it as an earthquake. His daughters were excited to go to the beach, so the family headed out around 10:10 in the morning. They were near the pool, slightly above the beach, when Lee noticed something strange. The water was rising. It wasn't like the movies with a giant wave visible on the horizon. The ocean simply rose, quickly and relentlessly, covering the sunbathers before anyone understood what was happening. People started running toward the hotel, some still laughing, not yet comprehending the danger. Lee grabbed his 4-year-old daughter Jane while the nanny took baby Jada. They turned toward the hotel. Within moments, the water reached Lee's hips, then his chest, then it kept rising. Then it was too late. The water makes you float. In the chaos, his 1-year-old daughter was swept away from the nanny. Lee watched helplessly as other hotel guests grabbed the infant and pulled her to safety. His family survived. Over 200,000 people around the Indian Ocean did not. That night, the survivors camped in the hotel lobby. Lee held his daughter Jada as she slept, but he couldn't sleep himself. His mind was racing. I thought that if God had saved me, it must mean something. That day in the Maldives was a real turning point for me. I had spent the first 41 years of my life thinking about Jet Li first, wanting to prove I was special, wanting to prove I was a star. Everything I'd done was self-centered. Watching people of different colors and nationalities helping each other, the hierarchies of normal life collapsed. Lee felt something shift inside him. I realized that all the money and power in the world would not have saved me from the water. That night, I decided I couldn't wait until I was retired. I had to do something right away. The man who had spent his life perfecting the art of combat was about to learn that the greatest strength had nothing to do with fighting. In 2006, Jet Li made an announcement that shocked the martial arts film world. His upcoming movie, Fearless, would be his final wushu epic. The man who had defined the genre was walking away. The film told the story of Huo Yuanjie, a historical figure who spent his youth obsessed with fighting, determined to prove himself the greatest champion. But tragedy forced him to reconsider everything he believed about strength. He emerged transformed, using his abilities not to dominate, but to inspire. For Lee, the parallels to his own journey were unmistakable. Everything I believed, the physical part, the mental part, I put everything in the film. Wushu, Lee explained, had multiple levels. The first was using physical skill against your enemy. Most martial arts films never got beyond this, but the highest level was using no weapon at all. Understanding that the greatest victory didn't require fighting, critics called the film a brilliantly choreographed, beautifully filmed end cap to Lee's quarter-decade of epic martial arts glory. The following year, Lee founded the One Foundation for Disaster Relief. His formula was simple: 1 person plus 1 yuan per month equals 1 big family. He took an entire year off from filmmaking to dedicate himself to charity. He met with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett to discuss philanthropy. The action star who had once told Richard Nixon he wanted to defend 1 billion Chinese countrymen had found a new way to fulfill that promise. Not with his fists, with his resources, his fame, and his heart. In 2010, doctors gave Jet Li news that would fundamentally alter his life. He was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, a condition where the thyroid produces excessive hormones affecting metabolism, heart rate, and virtually every system in the body. For a martial artist who had built his career on precise physical control, it was devastating. Li kept the diagnosis private for 3 years, managing it with medication that came with severe side effects. He couldn't exercise strenuously. His weight fluctuated unpredictably. The body that once moved faster than cameras could capture was betraying him. The hyperthyroidism was compounded by decades of accumulated injuries, a cracked vertebrae, broken ribs, a serious ankle fracture, internal injuries from a 12-foot fall during filming. His doctors delivered a stark warning: continue making action films and you'll end up in a wheelchair. I'm in pain, Li acknowledged, but I'm not in a wheelchair yet. Then came that photograph in 2018, taken during a visit to a temple in Tibet. It showed Li looking dramatically aged. When the image went viral, fans feared the worst. Many didn't recognize the man in the picture. Li's manager addressed the concerns, explaining it was simply an unflattering angle. Li posted on social media, "I'm doing great and feeling great." The truth was more complicated than a single image could convey. He was dealing with chronic illness, but he wasn't dying. He was aging, but he was also at peace with that process in a way most people never achieve. The man who had spent his life mastering physical perfection had learned to accept physical limitation. In 2020, Jet Li returned to the screen in Disney's live-action Mulan. The role was notable for what it wasn't. He didn't portray a warrior. He didn't perform elaborate fight sequences. He played the Emperor of China, a figure of wisdom who observes and guides rather than fights. He had initially turned down the role. There were disputes about pay and script concerns. What changed his mind were his daughters. Huge fans of the original animated film, they asked their father a pointed question: "Are you proud to promote Chinese culture to the world?" The question cut to the heart of everything Li had tried to accomplish since that 11-year-old boy told Nixon he wanted to defend 1 billion countrymen. His daughters were asking him to live up to his own values. The casting was symbolically perfect. The young fighter had become the wise elder. The man who spent decades demonstrating what the body could do was now demonstrating what presence and dignity looked like. "I never say to myself, I'm the best fighter in the world," he explained. "If someone uses martial arts to pick fights, to bully others, that person cannot be considered a true martial artist." Looking back at Jet Li's career, the statistics are staggering. Lethal Weapon 4 remains his biggest American hit at $130 million domestic. Hero became the third most successful foreign language film in US history. He was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. But the more meaningful legacy isn't found in box office numbers. Jet Li could have been Nixon's bodyguard. He chose to defend his countrymen differently. He could have sold his movements to the Matrix franchise. He protected his life's work instead. He could have chased Hollywood blockbusters until his body completely failed. He walked away to focus on charity, family, and spiritual growth. The One Foundation has been involved in disaster relief across Asia, responding to earthquakes and typhoons, funding mental health initiatives, supporting children in crisis. The movie star who once earned 14 cents a day has helped mobilize millions for people in need. "Life is a movie too," Li once said when asked why he stepped away. "The story we tell on screen is only one version of who we are. The story we live is far more important. In martial arts, there's a concept that the highest level of mastery isn't about defeating your opponent. It's about transcending the need to fight at all." Jet Li spent decades perfecting the art of combat. Then he spent the second half of his life demonstrating that the greatest warriors know when to put down their weapons. That photograph from 2018 showed a man who looked nothing like the explosive martial artist fans remembered. But maybe that was the point. The boy who stood on that podium in China, shorter than the men he defeated, crying as he thought of his mother's sacrifices, had grown into something greater than a movie star. He had become exactly what he told Nixon he wanted to be: a man who protects others, not with his fists, with his choices. Jet Li didn't disappear from Hollywood because he couldn't hack it anymore. He disappeared because he found something more important. And in a world obsessed with fame and money and eternal youth, that might be the most impressive move he ever made.